Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
On the Salience Podcast today, we are exploring feedback and feedforward in the complex space of policing and investigations. I am joined in this episode by Lou Hayes, who is a 26-year veteran police officer and detective for a suburban Chicago Police Department. Some of his assignments have included patrol, field training officer, criminal investigations, Firearms and Tactics Training Unit, Crisis Intervention Team, and SWAT. His current roles are with the Regional Homicide Unit, with a passion for multi-agency intelligence and technology. Lou has also developed and pioneered the Illinois model, a non-linear problem-solving process for police officers. The model prioritizes life, constitutional objectives, incident strategy, and tactics in rapidly changing and high-stakes circumstances. Since its development, the Illinois model has expanded greatly to serve as a pathway to human and organizational adaptability. Today, we will be learning more about this model and how Lou and his colleagues think about feedback and feed-forward loops when they're conducting investigations. Welcome, Lou.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, super excited. We've been trying to make this happen for a while, but Lou's schedule's been a bit crazy, so I'm so happy that we finally found the time. So, Lou, you and I met for the first time, I think, in person when I was living in Chicago. Nice to make that Chicago connection again. Before we get started on the main topic, I'd really love to chat a little bit about you. As I know you have an interesting story, you actually dropped out of college to become a cop. Could you share a little about your earlier life and what inspired you to choose this path?
Yeah, my father was a police officer. He's still alive, as is my mother. So I grew up in a family with a Chicago Italian mom and a police officer and Navy mechanic veteran dad. We never really had repairmen around the house. My dad fixed everything, from toaster ovens to washing machines to HVAC systems. And as I was growing up, my dad started a second job as a HVAC repairman, and my brothers and I would accompany him on some of these jobs. We learned a lot about systems. We learned a lot about electrical systems and air systems and gas and all sorts of things coming together inside all of these different appliances that you'd find in your house. And I think that was really my first introduction to systems thinking. So when it was time to start applying to colleges, I looked at mechanical engineering as my major. I loved it. I felt like I had both the practical side plus the academic side, but I was always kind of burning to be a police officer. So when the opportunity came up, I left. I took a job with the suburban police department and been there for over 26 years now.
That's incredible. I mean, it's not a normal path that I think most kids at college age take. So that must have been a, sort of big decision for you. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to make that decision? Like, what was the process going through your mind at that point?
I knew I didn't want to sit in an office job. I thought that there was more out there, and I always enjoyed listening to my father tell stories about being the police. So there's just a sense of excitement. And I knew that, not only did my brothers and I look up to him, but the neighbor kids looked up to him as well. So it was something that I found great honor in being able to serve as in the police force. I transferred from mechanical engineering into finance. I said, hey, if I'm going to be a cop, I might as well learn something that I could use in my personal life. I don't think mechanical engineering is going to serve me too well in my family home.
No, that's wonderful. I think that there you have it, right? We've done some of these interviews and everyone always references somebody they respect, a role model in their life. So I think that there's something there around that feed forward for our lives, right? I wanted to talk now a little bit about, the topic that we're working on this season, which is feedback and feed forward. And I'd really love to understand, in your experience in policing and investigations, how does pattern or signal detection play into some of your decision making?
Well, let's go back to my thoughts on systems thinking, and it was very mechanical, right? It was very closed, it was very reductionist. And as I got put into policing, I realized that it's very organic, it's very complex, and realized that some of the ways of thinking that I got brought up with just didn't apply anymore. There were not very solvable answers. It was more of what we would deem as like interventions or, short resolutions. And there's never an end to policing. It's just perpetually changing. So I needed to change the way that I thought about making decisions in policing. Some of the influences that I had were Snowden's Cynefin or John Boyd's OODA loop, which is the observe, orient, decide, and act cycle. Those were some of the major influences for me in seeing that there's a complex world where you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. You're dealing with incomplete information. Nothing is cut and dry or black and white. So those are some big influences for me to say we need to do a better job of training our police officers. I had been put early on in my career onto the SWAT team, which was very tactical, very physical based. And I got put into a training role where I would start training on firearms, which then grew into team movements and team tactics, which turned into more of the strategic thinking, which turned into incident command training. So we went from something very granular to something more philosophical in nature. And what I realized is feedback and feed forward and predicting and anticipating is really the name of the game here. So I just saw this collusion and this collision of all of these different concepts that I learned with OODA and Cynefin and the left of bang concepts, complex adaptive systems, just all together.
When you and I first met, you mentioned that book, Left of Bang, which I really liked. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what that book talks about, how you might incorporate it in some of your thinking.
Yeah, when we talk about signals, what I really think we talk about is just all the different inputs that we can have. And so many of them just stack into patterns. And life is full of patterns. We see the same cluster or the same constellation of facts over and over again. And that's what etches into certain biases and heuristics and schema within our brains. And it's these shortcuts that help us live life without experiencing every single day as something absolutely new. So identifying what fits within patterns or does not fit in those patterns is a big part of making decisions in complex systems. So there's certain crimes that are committed in the same ways over and over again. There's certain behaviors that folks have when they're scared or when they're aggressive or when they're docile. And the book Left of Bang is about picking up on those responses early on a timeline on the left side, as opposed to trying to react to them in some ultra urgent, ultra important on the right side. So Left of Bang talks a lot about those baseline patterns of what would be deemed normal, routine, expected, and then that makes it much easier to be able to pick out what those anomalies are from those patterns.
Now, thanks for that explanation. That's really critical, I think, to how we think about signal detection, feedback from situations, and the importance of sort of really recognizing with some situational awareness, right? And you talked earlier about this different state shift that you experienced when you went from very granular sort of focus on the details type policing, and you shifted your sort of fractal focus to more strategic issues. Now that shift, right? I just wanted to tap into that a little bit. How did your ability to pick up patterns, to make sense of signals, change, from when you were maybe like a rookie cop when you just joined the team, and then as you grew in experience, like how would you describe that shift?
Yeah, well, when I became the police, we were still printing out our policies, right? And you're dealing with like a 5-inch thick binder full of if this, then that procedures and ways to do things. I was always troubled by it because I felt like it didn't really apply in every situation. And so many of the bosses would tell you, well, it's a guide. It says, well, it's not really a guide if you can be disciplined for it. So that troubled me a little bit. And I said, well, what if we started rewriting these in ways that was more strategic, more concept-based, where the constraint was not like a limiting constraint, but more of an empowering constraint. And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I've been fighting that for 20-something years. Because I think once you gain experience, you start getting this Rolodex or this file cabinet of experiences. And you realize that this is what's happening based on what I'm seeing now. You're getting like snapshot views. And it's very possible that a very experienced officer or detective is going to be wrong, but at least it's a starting point of some theory or hypothesis of what you think's happening in a moment. For example, some burglars are very, very methodical and very regimented in how they commit certain crimes. So it's like a signature move. In the movie Home Alone, there's the wet bandits where they always left the faucet on. And there's those similar variables that repeat over and over again that once you start getting more experience, you can pick those things up. And I think that we've discounted experience in policing. And we says, hey, we're just going to replace it with 5 inches of white paper policy. So that I've been trying to take policies that are 10 and 12 pages and turn them down into 3 pages and 4 pages and giving a lot more judgment and discernment to the officer as opposed to a policy.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think like what you mentioned, right? There's a wisdom that comes with experience and having seen many cases. Do you feel as though there are things that maybe rookie cops are able to pick up that more seasoned minds actually miss, though? Is there that kind of more, they pick up anomalies a little bit better? Do you see that in the field?
There's definitely something that comes with having a diverse workforce. And I think the diversity in age is a big one, is that they're seeing things that the older cops do not, such as how are the young people behaving and how are they communicating and what are the norms of their behavior and how they text and use social media. Those are things that the older cops are having a hard time picking up on because we don't have the experience with those things. So there are definitely things generationally that the younger cops pick up on. I would venture to say that there's a lot more schooling going on from older cops to younger cops, however. There are certain factors in human behavior that it doesn't matter the technology or the tool that's in the hand, that people are still people, and those are the powerful patterns to pick up on.
So that's a great one. So if imagine that I am a rookie, right? And they've asked me to shadow you, right? And it's my first day on the job. What are the top 3 things you would want me to learn?
So I did spend time as a training officer, which means that I'm riding in the passenger seat with brand new police officers. I've ridden many a shifts with a policeman on their very first shift out of the police academy. And the conversation really has to do with feedback, as you've brought up much earlier, is I'm going to give you feedback. It might hurt your feelings, but it may also keep you alive and out of the civil court system. So keep in mind that your feelings and your emotions are going to come second to those things. That being said, I will do my best to not embarrass you in front of others and for you to be able to keep your own sense of dignity throughout the process. And that's been a speech that I've given to many rookies along the way. And I tell them, I'm somewhat jealous of you. You're brand new. You look like you're 12 years old. And people don't expect you to know the answer. But now they look at me, they see that my hairline's receding, they see my leather gear is worn out and my uniform is not as crisp as it once was. They expect me to know all the answers. So it's that beginner's mind that everybody can appreciate. It's like you have to be comfortable saying, I don't know, but my partner does, or I will find out the answer for you. So a big part of it is just understanding that you're not expected to know it all, and you will learn some things cannot be accelerated. It will just happen through natural experience.
No, that's great. I think that as you've mentioned, that intergenerational pairing, I've always found so useful. And again, I don't have any policing background, but I see it in the movies all the time. So it's really nice to know real incidences from a time-tested cop here on this session with me.
When I became a detective, I was very young on the force, and my partner had over 20 years as a police officer, and we would go through crime bulletins, and I would try to figure out how I would solve these cases. And him, in just snap judgment, he says, this is what's going on this one, and this is what's going on this one, and this is what's going on here. He says, well, how do you know this? He says, because it always happens that way. And he was right the vast majority of time. So I learned very early on that you have to respect this experience in the veteran officers.
I mean, that's a really interesting one. I want to ask you, right, because what you've mentioned here is a wealth of experience and the ability for somebody as a seasoned officer, drawing from that wealth of experience to detect patterns, to match patterns that somebody who doesn't have that experience can, right? I just want to check with you what your thinking is around that. Like, there is a benefit, there is an advantage to that because you can pick things, you can join the dots in a specific way. There is this big conversation and debate going on around the creation of cognitive biases because you have accumulated so many patterns, right? And then some people are saying, but those biases are not necessarily bad things. They're, really good survival heuristics, right? To keep us alive, all the muscle memory, all the drilling that most uniform groups go through. So there is that debate, right? So what is your take on it between bias and heuristic?
Yeah, bias isn't bad. Bias just is. It needs to be taken as something that's neutral, but it gets us into problems when it's not based on reality. Every one of us has some limited experience in the realm of the world, and it will never be whole, it will never be full, it will never be truly accurate. But I think it could be good, but you have to be willing to open those things up. One of my roles now is as a homicide detective. So you're dealing with extremely high stakes, high emotion, high profile cases. And our team is very good at opening up the floor within closed doors to develop theories and challenge those theories. You have to be able to take an approach that says, this is what I believe is going on. Who has information that would go against this or disprove this? So I think the most powerful detectives on our team are those that are seeking to disprove their assumptions as opposed to seeking out and trying to find things that confirm them. And I think it takes a strong personality to say, this is what I think is going on, but I'm probably wrong, so let me figure this out. So you walk into these cases with a handful of competing theories and say, how am I going to disprove each of these things so over time I can refine these? You start eliminating some of those theories because of the impossibilities, and then you start confirming others, and that's how you start polishing these theories off until eventually you solve it and you make a prosecutable arrest.
That's really great. I love what you've mentioned here, right? This I think similar to how you talked about the beginner's mind and this rookie needing to understand that they they should say they don't know if they don't know. And I think it's even with a seasoned person is recognizing that, hey, I have these very strong theories, but I need to seek to disprove them. And that's how I can arrive at the right one. And I need to have multiple competing theories. I think those are such great, very practical advice that everybody can take going into very uncertain work, right?
Yeah, I think part of this comes down to having to take each clue in by itself and say, how does this prove, disprove, support or go against, or is this something neutral to this particular theory? So in the crime analysis world, we have the ideas of mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, where something either is or is not. So we develop theories that would basically cover all of the possibilities, but do not overlap. But then we also come up with we take those same theories and take each and every clue or each and every piece of data or information or fact observation that we have. Say, is this something that supports that? Something that conflicts with that, or is this neutral to it? So it's, the fancy word is analysis for competing hypotheses. But basically you just say, like, how does this piece of information factor into what my theory is? So, it's something that I try to teach my kids all the time when they're presented with different sets of facts about some story, maybe some problem that happened in the schoolyard or in the neighborhood. It's like, okay, well, let's break this down into each and every clue. Figure out what possibly could be going on, what else could be going on. So we try to build new theories off of those as well.
I love that you use that word clue. It's such a basic word and it's such a great word. And these days I hardly hear anybody use it. They're all like data, evidence, but sometimes it's that clue, right? It's that piece of information that, I think this might be interesting or useful.
Yeah, everybody tries to sound important and academic, but in reality, it just turns into gobbledygook.
Yeah. So I want to now sort of segue because, you've developed this wonderful Illinois model. I would love to have you explain and describe it to our listeners. What is it about? What led to its development?
So several members on the SWAT team and I were put in charge of a training unit, and we moved around to about 15 police departments providing training, mostly tactical in nature, which is firearms and rescues and building searches and working with police dogs, canines. And what I realized is there were two different approaches that could be taken. One is the approach we always took, which was to rehearse this like kids on a playground where they could just march around, it's highly choreographed movements, but didn't really give an understanding of any of the background or the concept behind it. The other approach was something that we took, which is, let's teach basic concepts. And from those concepts, you will develop the movements that you would have been choreographing otherwise. So we've got this highly choreographed, highly rigid, highly formalized approach on one end, and the other end is very much judgment-based, very open, organic, and somewhat empowering to the officers. So we took all of these classes that we were teaching and realized that we could boil these down into some basic concepts. And that's what we started. We started teaching concept-based movements. In reality, it was a shortcut. We were able to cut and paste the first 2 or 3 pages of all our lesson plans into every single topic that we taught. And we realized that, hey, there's actually some genius involved in this, in that we have a baseline where we could always go back and anchor all of our classes back to one particular framework. And all we would be doing is changing maybe the concept or the circumstance or the situation in which it's applied to. So we wanted this general versus specific, right? So you got the general and specialism dichotomy. We wanted to create generalists that would be able to adapt really well. So instead of giving off a toolbox full of 10 or 20 wrenches, we wanted to give somebody an adjustable wrench that worked really well in most situations. And there was pushback from that because no self-respecting mechanic would ever use an adjustable wrench. It's not the tool for the job. There's a specifically sized wrench for that nut or bolt. But we said this isn't mechanical in nature. This is something that's organic, and time matters, and cognitive load matters. The stakes are high. Emotions are running here. So we felt that taking this concept-based approach was far superior. So once we started adding in the incident command structure to this, and we started getting asked to teach constitutional law and how it applied in these situations, we realized that there was a way that we could teach all of these topics under a singular framework. And when we got asked to start teaching this around the country, we realized that it needed a name. Foolishly, we picked the Illinois model, and the rest is history. For about 20 years, I've been moving around teaching this decision-making model to police officers, supervisors, detective SWAT teams, tactical medics. It's been a nice ride.
No, that is really great. So for our listeners, we are going to pop the website that Lou talks about, the Illinois model, into the description, so you guys can pop in, take a look, because I know there's a nice little diagram and some explanations on the website. So we'll pop that link in so everyone can take a look at it. I really want to pick up on something, because you've mentioned multiple times now, right? How emotions are often riding high, because these are some really gritty life and death situations. In a lot of other work, right, we talk about how emotions are actually really useful signals, right? It is data back to you that you feel a certain way, and sometimes you should regard it important as feedback. However, in many of your cases, right, the emotions are riding high might not necessarily be the right kind of feedback. So I just want to pick up on that comment around emotions, and what do you make of it?
Yeah, I think emotions are signals. Emotions can be tools. Emotions are useful, and emotions are hurtful. So much like biases, emotions just are. And we need to be able to work with them, around them, and despite them. We know a lot of research about emotions and how it impacts decision-making, both positive and negative. So you look at the work of Dr. Gary Klein or Daniel Kahneman. There's some heavy research that goes into how emotion impacts that. Right now, I'm doing a lot with interview and interrogation work, and it's very emotion-based, where you need to go into an interview, maybe either on a street corner, very hasty, or into an interview room in a very formal setting in a police station, and ask somebody to divulge information that they don't want to. And you have to find out what the motivators are, what causes them to give up information, what causes them to hide information, and to work with those. And you've got to display your own emotions in a way that's going to potentially make them feel more comfortable, more uncomfortable, or to get them to change their mood, to change their, like there's a certain atmosphere that's in the room. And you've got to be able to use emotion to sometimes shift that atmosphere in the room. I remember one particular interview I was conducting with a murder suspect. And over the course of 2 days, we're in the 7th hour of interviewing this person. And when he finally confesses to pulling the trigger and shooting this person, I remember the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got the chills. I'm actually getting the chills right now as I'm telling you the story. But the emotion inside me was running so high, but I could not let it show. And I assumed that my partner in the room with me was experiencing probably the same thing going on in his body, and he wasn't letting it go. And we had to suppress that. And I remember leaving the room and just so much excitement to know that we solved this case. We solicited this confession. We got so much truth out of this person that it was a success for us. But we had to keep our emotions in check. But through those course of those 7 hours, there were other times where I was faking other emotions of being upset or being more stern, when it was a lot of it is putting on a mask, almost putting on a show. And I think now we've taught a lot of our younger generation to suppress so much of that emotion that they kind of walk around like zombies, where they're somewhat emotionless. And when they do experiencing deep or really intense emotion, they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You must go through so many emotional roller coasters in your job. And what you mentioned there, you left that room. There was so much emotion. You had to hold it in. On a very personal level, how do you manage? How do you deal with it?
Usually by eating a lot of food. So that's why I'm a fat guy. To go back to my Chicago Italian mom and grandparents and aunts and uncles, I take out a lot of stress on my barbecue and smoker. Go on a lot of long walks with my dog, listen to a lot of podcasts and read books to try to get lost. So I think there's a reason why first responder psychology is a specialty, and that there's something very unique about what first responders go through and the psychology that goes along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but you cited a few things there, right? It's not just eating. You also go for these walks. You find a way to read, and it is escaping, but it's also enhancing. So I think got a nice sort of balance of factors there.
It doesn't hurt that my wife is a ER trauma nurse, so I think I know she experiences the same things that I do. And, we have good sounding boards back and forth from her and I. There's definitely days that we have that are extremely bad, and we share those, and others that are very good. It's something that we did that we're proud of. And we get to share those. In the stories that we tell each other are drastically different than those that we tell our family or neighbors.
It must be nice to have that person to be able to share and understand, right? To sort of truly get what you're saying in a way.
Yeah, well, there's a reason why they make policeman and nurse wedding cake toppers. It just have. I think they're probably outsold though by the firemen and nurse wedding cake toppers.
That's so good. So I wrote something down earlier when you were talking about the Illinois model. You were saying you were moving from this very strong choreographed type of training approach to something that is more conceptual. So choreography to concept, right? Which is really nice. And I really liked how you expressed it. In the Illinois model, is there something that talks about some of this, like that? How do you manage your emotions? How do you tune into something? How do you make use of the resources in the room to shift things? Like, are these things that you can teach?
I think there is. So the structure of the Illinois model, when you look at it, we designed it into a pyramid where the top is the most important and the bottom is actually the least important. So at the top, you're in an area where it's very philosophical and very abstract, where you're looking for a sense of purpose, a sense of intention. And then as you move your way down, it becomes a little bit more concrete. So you move from a sense of purpose down into goals or objectives or more identifiable missions. And from there, you turn into more strategy, which is broader type planning. And then you move into tactics, which is more defined, where it's more team-based. And then you go down one more level where it's the individual skills and equipment and tools that you have. And I think we do a really good job in policing of teaching the tools and the individuals and to some sort of like standards of performance and scores and qualifications and certifications. We don't necessarily do a good job of dealing with the somewhat emotional side, which is up at the top. So when you look at the sense of purpose or the sense of intention, those are mental and emotional decisions. And then in the middle, you're dealing with much more mental decisions of strategy and planning. And then as you get down into the bottom tiers, it's much more physical based. So I think there's some interplay in there. And if you look at the work of John Boyd, he talks about the mental, moral, and physical natures of war. And then he basically crosshatches those with the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of decision-making or planning. He says when you look at those high-level strategic and moral, that is the most important. Where the least important is going to be those tactical and physical natures of war. So it's basically a 3x3 matrix. And I want to make sure that cops have a very good understanding of why they're there not necessarily why they're the police, but maybe why are they at least at that particular call or incident or location or street corner or alley or parking lot. Why are they there? What are they trying to accomplish? So the questions that I continually ask is up at the top is really the questions of why. In the middle is what. And then in the bottom tiers is the how. So anytime that you're in a situation and you want to ask yourself why, you're moving up in tiers in our model. And when you're asking why, you're moving down the tiers into something more concrete, something more performance-based. So we jokingly call this tactical philosophy, in that it's very philosophical up at the top and very tactical down at the bottom. And you've got to be able to run this gamut. And as situations change, your purpose and intention has to change. So it's very cyclical and perpetual. It's like a corkscrew, right? Where you're cycling through this process of why am I here? What am I trying to do about it? What are my plans? And what skills and tools do I have to put into play right now? So I think there is a natural flow from the emotion, right? Where I think it's an emotional, mental, and physical in that order.
That's beautiful. I was wondering if there are any experiences or stories you might be able to share about, how the Illinois model was applied in some real cases and how that was what made a key difference.
I've been living this for like 20 years. So let me give you the criticism of the model. The criticism of the model is that it's prescriptive in that you're asking somebody to go through a checklist when it is not appropriate, right? When it's a very evolving, fast-moving situation. A gunfight, for example. And my argument is, well, you do go through it, but you go through subconsciously, or you've gone through it before through pre-planning or through your experiences, that you are accelerating through this decision-making process. Very much like Boyd's OODA of Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, which is a highly bastardized, highly perverted simplification of Boyd's work. But there is a general flow through those phases. I think the same phases you go, I would always say that you take the Illinois model and you dump it into the Orient phase of Boyd's OODA. And that helps you determine, like, what are my goals and objectives and plans? So I've internalized it, right? But there are times when we're out in the field and high stakes environment where I need to remind myself, what am I doing? What am I trying to accomplish? And not to over-engineer a response, right? An over-engineered response would me being a chess player trying to control every single person that's out under my chain of command out there, where I said, hey, I'm going to let them handle the problem, but I need to give out at least what is going on, what we're trying to do about it, and a basic plan. And that's where I stop, right? I just stop at those three top tiers and let my people do the rest, right? They're close to the problem. They're seeing the real life changes. So, but they have to tell me if something big changes, where then we need to start over with new missions and new objectives. So we see this succeeding all the time. And I know it succeeds because I can hear the way that officers get on the police radio and report incidents and how they're going down. Is they're structuring those situational reports in a very methodical way that adheres to this framework. Boss, this is what I have going on. This is what I'm trying to do. And the basic plan is this. Everybody good? Yeah. All right. So we are seeing it. It's become internalized. It's conditioning. And we've kind of taken it from what Kahneman would say is like system 2 thinking into shelving it into more system 1 or more primary thinking.
No, that's beautiful. What you shared there, right? Those three things, those are such useful heuristics, right? It's what am I doing here? What do I have in front of me, right? What am I trying to achieve? And this is the basic plan. That's almost like the way I imagine it is somebody on the field providing feedback, and then from a leadership perspective, if you're sort of there and you're the top guy, you have to provide that feed forward into the team so that they can orient around sort of those three heuristics, provide feedback that helps to shift, reinforce, the three things that have been stated, and it's that OODA loop that you've talked about, right? That for me was a very beautiful example of how it's being used in real life.
Yeah, part of my role is to develop operational plans. So certain missions, whether it be search warrants or surveillances or apprehensions, and I've changed the way that I write those, right? Very similarly to how I asked that policy be changed to be written to be more conceptual, our incident plans are much more conceptual, where we identify the intentions, the missions, and the strategies. And we say, hey, we have some preferences in here, but these other things are allowed. And that's a big departure from how police operational plans have generally been. I've seen them written very horribly. And those are, we're going to do a search warrant on a house, and these two officers are going to go to this room, and these two officers are going to go to this room. And they never go to that room, but then they have nothing to fall back on because they weren't really taught how to make decisions. They learned how to handle choreography, but when you get punched in the face, as Mike Tyson says, all plans are out the window.
No, I think, it's like I feel that choreography you've referenced a couple of times now, it's almost like people trying to over plan, right? They're trying to create an action plan without a plan for the intention. Now, I mean, how do you feel when your guys hit the ground, right, with the high-level conceptual plan? How then do they actually make those decisions, the more tactical ones, when they hit the ground?
I think a lot of it comes down to giving feedback and debriefing. I've committed that our teams need to be a learning organization that take every opportunity to go over what went well and what went poorly. How can we do things better? I hate the word psychological safety. I hate that term. I think it's soft. I don't think it does justice. It turns a lot of us off. But there's something that trust and confidence that your idea is going to be held on its idea and not against the person. Right? So we separate ideas and performances from the people that thought them or did them. And we just judge the ideas and performance and say, let's approach how this got done or what you were thinking during that time. And we continually come back as teams and say, let's go back over what happened last week or yesterday or 2 hours ago. And I think the power there is that you then imagine what the new or the more preferred way or what could have been done better becomes a mental experience, a simulation. And There's some research that suggests that those simulations, if done appropriately and with the right intensity or the right focus, are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than actually having gone through them. So we bring in officers that maybe were not even in the experience to be in the situation into the debrief, and we want to give them that same sense of experience. So, hey, they weren't even at the call or the incident or the emergency, yet they're learning and they're using that as some simulated experience or scenario that they can now draw from. So we want to make sure that all of our people are appropriately experienced in that. And, we can't discount the communication piece here either. I mean, the good teams communicate these things, and they communicate things well in advance from when you actually need it. You set up a lot of these contingency plans and you anticipate how things might go. And once you have those anticipations in place, again, it's like a pre-orientation where I'm able to grease my decision making by saying, if this happens, then that. So you don't have to go through a very rigid checklist decision making. It's more stimulus response. It's this happened. I already considered all the options through it. Now I'm just putting this and putting this intervention in play.
I really like what you've said, because earlier in our conversation, we talked about the importance of incorporating diversity into the workforce, in terms of pattern detection and being able to pick up things and signals. What I'm hearing now is even more exciting, right? It's let's put diversity of experience in that imagination, that feed forward, that anticipation, the awareness, right? We're actually bringing in diversity there as well. Now that's, for me, is really exciting.
Yeah, the experiences that I've had in the last several years has been actually riding with police officers from other agencies. So not my own team, right? Riding with other teams and letting them ride with us. That's been very powerful because we get to see completely different approach in some situations. And we learn that and says, we've never thought of that before. Or likewise, they offer up suggestions to us that says, well, have you considered this? Well, no, we haven't. So, it's just fresh ideas, because once you get into a police department, unless you're assigned out to a task force like I have been, you become somewhat insulated to those. So the experiences of working with others from other agencies and other subcultures within policing has been super important to my own development.
That's beautiful. Now, Lou, we began this conversation by exploring some of your early days, those influences there. And we're getting close to the end of the conversation, right? I want to do two things. First, we have this tradition on the Salience Podcast where I try my best to summarize what I heard from you into 3 salient points. There are so many. I'm going to try my best. So I'm going to do that. And then I want to ask you some questions about the future after that. So what I heard, first of all, right? I heard a lot of you talking about the importance of going. Again, I'm going to use this. I think if you ever write a book, it's a good title for you, and I'll let you borrow it, right? It's going from choreography to concept, which I really like, right? Particularly as you move through scales, you move through the different levels of fractals of attention, right? Going, instead of the details, really going more into the conceptual level, training instead of mechanical skills, from adaptive skills, training from script to concept, going from more rigid to enabling constraints. That's what I heard. And you mentioned this corkscrew, right? That is in the Illinois model, where you're going from, sort of that more strategic intention, and then down as well to more of the technical. What do I have with me? What equipment? What am I able to do, right? And the ability to actually be able to hold both in mind, but from from a training and capability building perspective, right? If you really want to train decision making that is high quality, really focusing more on, the conceptual level of thinking. So that was the first I took from you. I'm trying my best to summarize. The other one that really stood out for me is the importance of diversity. Again, I like how you've talked about it, intergenerational sort of pairing, ride-alongs with different units, right? Ride-alongs with young rookies, and sort of getting that sharing of different ways of doing things, different pattern detection behavior, but also the ability to get other imaginations into the room, because we recognize that our own is not enough. And I think in that exchange, you're also helping somebody else to simulate, right? That if they were in this situation, what would they do? And that process is going to help them as well. I really like that one. And the third one that really stood out for me is this concept of emotions, because I think, as you've mentioned, right, emotions are a resource. They are something that just are, and it's important to recognize them, but also important to understand when we might have to manage them, right? Not necessarily act on them immediately, because that's how we're able to be a bit more intentional, right? Instead of just reacting to the emotions, but not to the extent of, as you've mentioned, the way we've made young people bottle it all up, right? How do we actually really cultivate a more healthy relationship with our own emotions? For me, those were the three salient things that I picked up in our conversation. Did I miss any? Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I enjoyed the way that you summed that up.
No, it was wonderful for me. So I'd like to check with you, Lou. We talked a little bit about your past. I would now like to end an interview with a focus on your future. What are some of your future aspirations, both in work and elsewhere in your life?
I've gotten a lot into technology now, and been trying to follow a little bit of the AI craze, finding out where AI is going to fit into all this data, right? Because we're not dealing with a lot of data, we're dealing with clues. And I don't think clues are as clean as a number or a drop-down menu or a pick list. So we have to go into this very cautiously. There's a push to get AI more into police technologies because we do generate a lot of data. We generate a lot of data that touches problems that have quality of life issues for people, from murders and shootings to robberies and carjackings and burglaries and thefts and identity takeovers. These are very personal issues for folks. They want us to use data to solve them, to get rid of them. So they're trying to push AI on us to do it better. I guess I question, how good does AI do it as compared to a seasoned police officer or detective? And how can we ensure that we're not interjecting the wrong biases via some machine learning or AI or some algorithm that we came up with? So I want to keep it pure. So a lot of my future is based on taking this information and finding a way to accelerate the pattern recognition within humans without poisoning it from AI. There's a lot of technology out there with object identification and videos, with mapping, with timelines, with all sorts of geospatial information out there. Started studying a little bit of data visualization. I started studying GIS systems to see how could we better display information and clues so that I could help accelerate that the pattern recognition within young cops so they could get a better awareness of what's going on. So that's been a lot of my focus, where I know it's definitely going to take me into the future. I've got probably 3 years left of policing. I don't know where it's going to take me from there. But then the last couple of years, I did return to the university. I did graduate, and I have this brand new crisp diploma that hopefully get put to use in some career beyond policing.
Oh, I mean, if you've gone into finance, I can imagine a lot of forensic finance that might need your help there, Lou. And no, that is wonderful. Such an important area. And I'm just thinking about this news article I read today about university having to discontinue a vending machine because it was using facial recognition technology on its students. And I mean, I agree with you. There are so many ways it could get out of hand. And I feel comforted knowing that there's someone who is focused on, sort of the philosophy and the right concepts, looking at it and trying to apply it in the right and ethical manner. So I feel that's a very comforting direction that you're taking for me.
Well, it's not very popular, right? I continually find myself butting up against vendors and sales folks, and they're pushing very hard, and they're very convincing to a lot of our bosses who are under a lot of pressure. So those of us that are challenging some of these advancements and trying to step on the brake a little bit, we could use more of you.
Well, I'm here if you need me, Lou. Well, I really want to thank you for your time. It was so hard to set this up, but it was totally worth it. I am so glad you managed to find the time. I loved our conversation, and I'm sure that the audience will too.
Thank you, Zan.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.